Police officers and just about anyone with experience in the realm of violence understand the concept of "I had a gut feeling." I had my share of them in the Vietnam War and on the city streets as a cop, but this time, it was a pleasant afternoon in August, and the feeling was different because it came at me out of the blue when I was engaged in a really no big deal traffic stop. Let me illustrate the difference between what is considered a typical kind of gut feeling in police work and what I experienced on that summer day. The previous winter, other officers and I responded to an armed robbery of a veterinarian hospital in which staff and customers, including an off-duty cop, were forced into a large dog cage. The cop was carrying his weapon, but he was quickly overpowered and disarmed. Just as we arrived at the hospital, dispatch told us that the three armed hold-up men had fled out the back door. One officer went into the hospital to gather information, and the rest of us began a coordinated search of the back lot and the connecting backyards of private residences. There were a number of stacked kennels in the lot, waist-high weeds, 2 sheds, and an old garage. This was before cops called SWAT for every little thing, so the three of us searched the kennels, the small buildings, and behind a 6-foot-high wooden fence surrounding the lot. All the while that we looked, it felt as if we were being watched. This was not unusual, because it fell within the parameters of the situation. Our search ended when police units checking side streets around the hospital radioed in that they had caught the suspects. The hold-up men subsequently admitted to hiding in a garage loft in the next yard over, a place from which they could see our movements as we searched. Again, there was nothing supernatural about the feeling of being watched, because we were at the scene of a crime just moments after the suspects had fled. But it was a completely different situation on that August afternoon on a tree-lined residential area. The day was just beginning to heat up, and the neighborhood streets were quiet, probably because anyone not at work was staying inside out of the sun. There was no other traffic around at all. There were no barking dogs. There was not even the sound of a chirping bird. It was just all completely silent. The driver blew through a stop sign like it was a green light, and I pulled him over in front of a 2-story white house. I never really liked writing citations for people, figuring that a simple stop and a warning was more than good enough to get most drivers' heads out of wherever they had been and back on the task of paying attention to the road. Usually it would be enough to scare most people into never doing something so silly ever again. The driver was really pleasant, apologetic, and he even thanked me. But that is when I felt it. My heart rate just suddenly accelerated, and I felt a tingling sensation dancing up my spine and bristling the fine hairs at the base of my neck. This wasn't anything new to me. I'd felt this feeling before. I felt it to both greater and lesser degrees many times in Vietnam, and at least once or twice a week on high-risk situations on the police job, such as kicking in a door on a dangerous warrant service or going up against a man with a gun in a tavern. But here, now, on a pleasant summer day on a sleepy street with nothing really happening. I bid the driver a good day and watched him pull away from the curb. It clearly had not been the traffic stop giving me the heebie-jeebies, because the feeling intensified as he pulled away. I made a 360-degree turn, scanning the sidewalks in all directions, as well as the streets as far as I could see, north, south, west, and east. I looked over at the big house that I was parked in front of, and the ones by each side of it. There was nothing there, and I did not see anything suspicious with the houses on the other side of the street either. So why was my adrenaline revving up? With the fight and flight juices sloshing around in my veins, and with no one and nothing around, and no threat to back away from, I just headed back to my car. But before I could even get there, the feeling just worsened. My heart was thumping now, my eyes were watering, and goosebumps were out on my arms. I had to get in the car and do so quickly. A lot of officers refer to their police units as their office. For some, they think of their car as a protective shield against threats and dangers from forces outside of it. This is an illusion, of course, because the car does not protect against much of anything other than the weather. In fact, it makes for a larger target. Officers know this, but they still take some comfort once they slip inside and shut the door. It's like sealing yourself off from the job, a tiny little reprieve from the horrors of the outside. But getting inside of my car did not alleviate any of the feelings. I again scanned all four sides. Nothing. Not until I accelerated away from the curb did that sensation start to lessen. 2 blocks away, I pulled under the shade of a big tree and sat for a moment. As my heart rate returned close to normal, my anxiety decreased and my adrenaline began to cool. Eventually, I returned to my patrol and my shift ended just 3 hours later without incident. The next day, my sergeant asked me to see him after roll call. "You stop a car on 63rd and Fleet on Tuesday?" he asked. I was joking with him. "I know nothing and I was not even there," is what I said, while smiling at him. When he didn't smile at the old joke, I got serious and I told him that I had. Guy blew a stop sign and I gave him a verbal. He complaining? I don't understand why he would file a complaint. I was really pleasant with him and you stop him in front of a white house, a big one, 2 stories. I didn't block their driveway. Did the owner? Then I remembered the terrible case of the creeps I'd had on the traffic stop. More accurately, the rush of dread I'd had after it. He told me I had better sit down, and then he said, "A young woman came into the precinct last night, said that a uniformed officer was in front of her house yesterday afternoon talking to a driver. Apparently, her fiancé has a real hate-on for the cops. He's an ex-com." I just said okay because I wasn't really sure where this was going. "He saw you through the window and he apparently flipped out. He told his girlfriend he was going to shoot you, so he retrieved a rifle, loaded the gun, and propped the barrel up on a windowsill. He lined you up in his sights and he was just about to fire when the woman leaped at him and tried to get the rifle away. Apparently, you drove off just while they were rolling around fighting on the floor. He got the weapon back and he was majorly upset to see that you had left, so he beat her up pretty badly. She eventually got away, and that's when she came here, to the precinct." I just slumped deeper into the chair, struggling for air. I didn't even know what to think or what to say. How could all of that have been going on just so close to me, and I had no clue my life was that close to ending? The sergeant told me it was a close one, and told me to be more careful out there. He told me I had used up all of my good karma. Okay, so I have not really told my story to many people, only really to my wife and my close friends. It happened while I was stationed in the army as a radio operator. This was during the Vietnam War. I have not forgotten it to this day. I was a young recruit, freshly drafted out of high school. I did not know very much about the war. I had no idea what I was getting into or what all of it was for. What I did know was that I had a duty to my fellow servicemen. We arrived on a Friday evening and got loaded onto many buses to be taken to our barracks. The air was very humid and the soil was soaking wet due to a storm that had just passed through the area. I vividly remember the drive and how it stunk like a sewer. My first night was pretty uneventful and quiet, but we all felt the tense atmosphere as our drill sergeants taunted us with stories during BAS training. I remember the half moon right over my head, which kept peeking out from under the clouds. All of us were just sitting around, telling jokes. I was more of a technical guy and did not have much of an aptitude for comedy, so I just sat and listened. My duty was to manage communications between my unit and all of our other guys, so that everyone knew what was going on everywhere else at all times, and so that important information could be relayed. I carried a box on my back, which were the size of radio devices back then, and also a ton more equipment and supplies. I was quickly assigned to a tight-knit unit who had just lost their communications operator to a landmine. I remember the first time that we made contact with the enemy. It was the loudest thing I had ever heard. We were in a dense part of the jungle and could not see the enemy at all, but we quickly ducked down as soon as they began firing at us. Then we immediately opened fire in their general direction in return. The chaos seemed to last forever, and we probably ceased fire after just a couple of minutes. We advanced forward to close in on the enemy and secure the area. It was the first time I ever saw the enemy up close. There they were, 3 dead Viet Cong soldiers laying in a pool of their own blood. I could not really believe what I was seeing. I could not believe that I was looking at 3 human beings that were alive just moments ago. They looked like young guys who maybe had sisters or brothers and parents. They still had their entire lives ahead of them. They were probably just chilling around moments before we arrived. And here we are, moments later, looking at their motionless bodies. But I must say that I felt justified because they were the enemy, and they would have been standing over our dead bodies instead. We had no choice in the matter. A few days later, we got assigned to a different location which saw heavier casualties and needed much more support. I grew accustomed to the violence and saw many of our young men die very painfully. One day, I was told by my NCO that someone wanted to speak with me. I was greeted by an older man in his late 50s who looked totally out of place. His demeanor was calculated and predictive. Even my commanding officer seemed to have turned into a yes man in front of this man. He introduced himself as RCK Douglas, an intelligence officer stationed nearby. He told me that I was going to be assigned to him as an RTO for his unit. I really liked my unit and wanted to stay with them, but orders are orders and I had absolutely no choice. So I got on the Huey and I went with him. We landed in a heavily wooded area next to a few Viet Cong huts. It was heavily built up by the enemy, and I could definitely imagine the fight that must have taken place here. There were some guys who had gas masks on and others standing nearby. They did not seem to notice me or even really care that I was there. It was a very strange atmosphere that did not feel quite right. These guys did not act like normal soldiers and definitely did not have the look of fear in their eyes as most of us did. I even tried to talk with some of them, but all I got was a strange, emotionless glare, like they were infected with something. Whatever it was, they all had it, and it made me feel very, very uneasy. Officer Douglas and I entered one of the smaller huts, and I was told to stay put until someone would come and get me. I should have just stayed there and just waited, but I was too curious and apprehensive to relax, so I just made my way out towards the main tent, and I took a peek inside. What I saw made my stomach drop like it never had before. On a makeshift table lay 6 murky containers. Each one of them had a severed head of a guerrilla fighter inside, with several tubes and wires protruding from them. A green liquid seemed to be reacting with the heads as their mouths and eyes were quivering like they were half alive. I suddenly felt a hand grab onto my shoulder. It was Intelligence Officer Douglas, and he looked very upset. I meekly asked what they were doing inside there, but he angrily said that I should not have gone in there, and he sent me back to my hut. We must have been attacked or something, because I woke up a day later in triage with several broken ribs and a fractured collarbone, with no memory of anything that happened right after that. I never saw Officer Douglas or those soldiers ever again during my time, if that was even his real name. I often wonder what those guys were doing back there. Maybe they were trying to gather intelligence from dead enemy soldiers or something. Either way, it was a strange experience that I will never, ever forget. One night, quite some time ago, I was dealing with a mental breakdown and depression. I had taken 5 Clonopin tabs, 5 tabs of midazolam, a glass of whiskey, and had maybe spent the day just smoking an entire ounce. So, a lot of benzos, alcohol, and pot. Then there was also the Tylenol Sinus. It works awesome with whiskey. Melatonin and some other sleep medication and painkillers. I was kinda expecting to die. I didn't plan to. At that time, I really just wanted a long night's sleep with no pain. But as I was laying there, lying on my bed, which was just a mattress on the floor, on top of a nice-looking carpet, because my bed lost a leg, I was feeling comfortable and warm and cozy. The benzos had removed the feeling of mental anguish, and the whiskey was turning those up to 100. It also went well with the weed and Tylenol. About 40 minutes into this, I started feeling stupidly tired. Midazolam is a benzo, but it's an absolutely powerful anesthetic used to put people to sleep pre-medical operations. I had taken 5 tabs, and usually they recommend a single tab every 3 days. Not only that, but I started feeling my body locking up, as in, I would sit down to try and steady myself, and I would find myself completely unable to get up. It was as if my body no longer responded. Then there was the cold. I live in Iceland, and it's absolutely cold here, but I'm used to it. But the cold inside my house that day got so intense that nothing compared to it. It came kind of out of nowhere too. I had been sitting exactly where I was for about 1 hour when the coldness just hit. It felt like a blizzard. My skin was actually burning with cold, and I could not move due to shivers. I half dragged my ass to the bedroom and covered myself and laid down, and accepted that an OD was on the way and that this was the end. I even somehow managed to put on the Doors' "This Is the End" on my phone. I had just about accepted that it was over. I was laying there, trying to find a comfortable position to lay in because my stomach and my arms had started to cramp at this point. I was trembling and cramping, and I had a feeling in my head like my head had been placed inside of a blender, and I was feeling extremely cold and unable to move at all. I remember thinking to myself that this was not a good way to go, but if it was my time, then I would see it through to the end. Then I broke down, and I started listing out loud my own regrets to myself, just like going down a checklist. To my surprise, I look at my bedroom door, and there was someone there. It was a goddamn shadow, phantom, ghost, whatever you want to call it, the usual black shadow that takes 3-dimensional form. Its face was actually pale even though it was black, and so was its hands. And it was scary, and I mean, turn your bowels into liquid kind of scary. It was so frickin' scary, I wiped off my mind the fact that I was about to die. I was more scared of this thing than actually no longer existing. The phantom had a face, and it was terrible to look at. It was like that of an old man or an old woman's, dry and wrinkly, but it would change and move, kind of like vapor. And here and there, you could see it take on goddamn demonic aspects, as in, the pupils would become cat-like. In one moment, it would have a regular mouth. Then in another, it would turn into this razor-bladed, fanged horror that bit down on its own lips. The thing stared at me for a long time, and then moved to the front of my bed, standing over me. It moved without moving, as if an invisible god had picked it up with a mouse click and then dragged it and placed it over there. It crouched down low and started crawling over me. Its face was pretty demonic at this point. It resembled that dude from The Exorcist, if there was anything to compare it to. It crawled over me until it was just face to face with me, and the cold at this point was unbearable. It was actually painful. It dawned on me that this was a demon from hell, here to drag my suicidal ass down. I was eye to eye with this thing. I was crying pretty badly at this point, and I just kept listing out my own regrets out loud. I was unable to control it. It was like a nervous thing. My mouth just kept going, even when I wasn't thinking about it. The thing just kept staring into my eyes as I sobbed uncontrollably, and much quicker than before, I was listing out all of the bad shit that I had done and the bad decisions I had made during my life. I felt my body lock up real bad, and I felt the worst stomach cramp that I ever felt in my entire life. My abdomen and my neck locked up in a muscle spasm, and I started feeling a burning pain on my sides. Finally, I was startled by my own heart, which made the strongest and loudest single thud. I swear, I actually felt my torso pump outwards with the strength of the beat. It was louder and felt heavier than I'd ever felt before. Then, there was a long silence. I felt no more fear, no more cold, and no more pain. There was no sound at all. I could not even hear the fan that was set right next to me. There was me and the phantom, which was still staring at me. I was no longer afraid, so I stared deep into its brown and red eyes. I felt it look back deep inside of me. It really felt as if this thing's stare was entering through my own eyes and scanning me from the inside. And then it spoke to me, and it said to me, "I will forgive you this time. Do not do this again." And I felt myself pull back into my mattress, and I do not remember the next. I woke up the next day, still sitting in the same spot that I had been before I had dragged myself to the bedroom. I do believe this was either my afterlife experience or a hallucination induced by the heavy drug usage. Still, it's my scary story, and I don't really have an explanation. It all just felt so real. So, when this happened to me, I had just fallen asleep. But I actually woke up in the middle of the night, only my body was truly paralyzed completely. I had experienced sleep paralysis before, so I was just kind of used to it. I was just saying in my head, because I couldn't actually speak, I was saying in my head to tell whatever was there to just let me sleep and fuck off. And then I see this shadow thing in my room. I panic, and I actually fall from my bed, and I start swinging at the shadow. It turns out that I'm not paralyzed. I can actually move. I am just reflexively moving my hands in a windmill trying to hit this thing, but I'm not feeling anything solid, and it's doing nothing. The thing actually punches me back in the face, and I feel it, and I fall to the ground. I grab the dumbbell that's right beside me. It was just one of those small ones that you can pick up with one hand, and I swung it in the direction of this thing. And when I hit the thing, it actually felt solid this time. Not like before when it felt like I was punching at air. I felt something meaty. I didn't want to let this thing get away. Now I was convinced that this was a person. I tried to swing at this thing again with my dumbbell, but I just completely missed and destroyed my plywood shelf. That shit exploded. But I just completely missed and destroyed my plywood shelf. I threw the dumbbell at him. The thing fell to the ground. I tried to get up on top of him to beat his teeth in, but as I got on top of the shadow thing, I woke up. A couple of days later, nothing really happens in the following days, except that while drinking some rum, I actually managed to destroy the shelf that I messed up in my dream. I did manage to fix it, but it did end up looking like it did in the other dream. I fell asleep. I wake up in the middle of the night. I see that same shadow thing again in my room. Not this again. I see multiple shadow things start to surround me. I start getting beaten up. I'm trying to scatter, but I just keep getting kicked while I'm down. I grab my tricep spring. One of the shadows grabs it too. I lean into him and I punch him with my free hand. I get enough time just to reach for my rosary and crucifix. I start whipping the shadows with the beads. It feels like I'm striking skin or something else. I get grabbed from behind and thrown back down. I get up, leading with my crucifix, and I wake up in a cold sweat. I wake up really sore. My back and shoulders felt pretty beat up. And whenever I moved my arms or legs, they kind of stung a little. I'm not really sure what happened. In 2018, I went hunting for the second time with my childhood friend, who is called Marty. I've known this man since pre-kindergarten. We went hunting somewhere in Alabama on some property owned by this guy named Mr. Bradford. The owner was nice. He had a real thick Southern hick accent, but he was very kind and, strangely enough, had a married daughter. He seemed really proud of her. I had hunted on this land just a year prior with Marty. On our first hunt together, he shot and killed a buck he had been tracking for over 5 years. On the second hunt, I shot and killed my first 8-pointer buck. It was a nice hunt, but in 2018, some storm had hit that area and the whole region had some really bad floods. When I got back in 2018, it did not feel the same. On the first night, Marty let me borrow one of his rifles and put me in his green patch. He was pretty comfortable with me being by myself while he hunted in a nearby patch, maybe less than half a mile away. The shack I was in was real small. It could hold maybe 2 people maximum. It was just plywood for the most part, with really shitty plastic sliding windows. There were 4 windows, 1 on each wall. 3 of them were big, and were obviously made for putting the gun through, taking aim, and then shooting. But the 4th was a small window by the entrance/exit, so you could see what was behind you. The door was loose and was locked in place by a swivel hook. When Marty dropped me off and drove away, I sat there for maybe an hour, just enjoying the scenery. To be honest with you, I was not going to shoot another deer. I was looking for a hog to shoot, but I was not really itching to kill anything at all. It was maybe around 5:30 p.m. The sun was still above the horizon, and it was still bright. All of a sudden, I noticed it was really dead quiet. The birds were chirping, the squirrels were jumping from tree to tree, the wind was rustling the leaves, but all of it just stopped. I felt tense, super tense. I immediately thought about all of the stories I had heard, and I made sure that my rifle was ready to fire. I even pulled out a knife and closed all the windows. I didn't really know what to do. I just had this instinct telling me to just stay put, despite how much I wanted to run back to the house, which was much closer to my hunting patch than Marty's location. I did not smell anything, but I started to hear something approach my shack from behind. It was not an animal. It sounded like something was cautiously approaching, taking measured footsteps to make as little noise as possible. Imagine a hunter slowly stalking the woods with his gun ready to fire, except this was not a hunter. I hear these footsteps softly crunch the leaves underneath until they stop behind me. All that stands between me and this thing is this thin door. I am clutching the knife in my hand because I feel like I'm not skilled enough to quickly turn and shoot. I then hear it breathe right behind my head, just behind the door. It is the heaviest exhale I had ever heard. Imagine a boar exhaling after running several miles, but followed by a 10-second pause with no inhale. That is what I heard. It sounded huge, it sounded heavy, it sounded dangerous. For some reason, a voice told me to keep on staring ahead and to not look behind me, no matter what I do, to not even glance at the window to my rear. I did not even want to look to my right or left. I kept staring ahead at that one tree standing in the middle of the green patch. I don't know how long it was there, but eventually I stopped hearing the thing. And then the silence stopped. The birds came back, the wind blew again. When it did this, I finally opened the door to the back and I looked around. There was nothing, not even any footprints or any trail. There was nothing to signify that this thing was even there. I tried texting and calling Marty and even using Snapchat, but I had no service. He told me that he would come and get me at sunset, and I did not feel safe running back to the main house with how far away I was. So I stayed put. I felt like that thing was still out there. Nothing remarkable happens to me next. I did hear a gunshot coming from Marty's location, and he came back a little bit later than I wanted, but he said that he tried shooting a deer and missed. When he picked me up, I waited until we were in his truck driving back to our little house until I told him. With the doors locked, I told him everything and he believed me. Even more than that, he told me that his little brother, called Danny, had something happen to him like that as well on the same property, but in a different location. He said that one night, Danny went hunting by himself with a raised shooting house. He said that he and his dad eventually got their phones blown up by Danny, demanding that they come pick him up together. When asked why, he just panicked. When they got there, Danny said he heard something or someone just approach him, but just stand directly underneath his shack and never move. It freaked him out so much that he called them to come and rescue him. Marty had some creepy stories as well, but nothing similar to me and Danny's experience, and honestly speaking, I attribute the shit that he went through to being sleep deprived after a 2-day hunt.